in Washington. Do they say this is just a bizarre footnote of the Trump era, or is that a reason to be concerned and to be alarmed?
I think it's very much a reason to be concerned and alarmed. I think it's not something that's going to go away with Trump. I think that Trump will be starting his own TV station, his own social media platform, and his own political party. And I think it will soon become bigger than the Republican Party. That's my prediction. And I think there are a lot of reasons to believe that this is what's going to be happening. And I think it all could be stopped. It could all be different from that future. That future does not have to exist. But if that future is not going to happen, then the Democratic Party would need to be a real party of the working class, which it has not been, at least since, well, really ever. I mean, it was, we have a very problematic two-party system. Neither party has ever really represented the interests of the working class. But the Democratic Party used to be the party of the white working class. That's how they represented themselves, and they later started changing. And now they're the party of the, I don't know, the multiracial bourgeoisie, and they have nothing to do with the working class. And they're all about intersectionality and identity politics and pretending to represent the interests of black people and brown people and LGBTQ people, while really they represent the interests of the ruling class, just like the Republicans do. And so it's very easy for these two parties to divide and conquer the population in many different ways. But I think the game is up now. And now the game has to stop. If they keep on pretending to represent the interests of the working class while actually representing the ruling class, then that's just a formula for fascism, as any German familiar with their own history is well aware. And it's really the same pattern, the same kind of pattern that we have seen playing out in many different countries, whether you're talking about recent history of places like Brazil or going further back to Italy or Germany in the early 20th century. The pattern plays out in the same kind of way, where the working class, the party that's supposed to represent the interests of the working class, fails to do so decade after decade, and eventually something else happens. And now that something else is happening. And what is happening, I think, is a rising fascist movement that doesn't use the term fascism, but it is a fascist movement, and it is much, much more complicated than just a racist movement. And if people try to think of the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer as simply white supremacists, then they are really not understanding the gravity of the problem or the complexity of the problem. It's much more complex than racism.
Diese ganzen Probleme werden natürlich und logischerweise
well, all these problems
einen massiven
go along
Kommunisten
with a fight against communism, with a Red Scare in the United States, an irrational fear of everything that seems to be socialist or anything that is even just social. You, as a left artist who represents this, what is social, who represents an anti-capitalist left position, how has your situation changed over the last years? And of other artists who think along similar lines like yourselves, have you gotten under pressure in certain regions? Do you still have the opportunity to perform? Are there no-go areas now for left artists in the United States?
I think it's very complicated and strange and maybe difficult to understand. But I believe it is a fact that if Bernie Sanders had been the candidate for the Democratic Party, that could have taken the steam out of this rising right-wing movement, which seems so strange to say that a Jewish socialist could actually have that impact on a rising right-wing movement. But I believe that would have been the case because I believe that this movement, which you could say it began a long time ago, or you could say it began in the early 90s, or you could say it really picked up steam after the global financial crisis with the Tea Party, what they called the Tea Party. But this movement is responding, whether they know it or not, the movement is responding to the widening class divide in this country. It is an effort to respond to this divide, and I don't think it's even fully conscious of the fact that this is what this movement is. But I believe that's what it is. And if the rent had not doubled in cities like mine over the course of the Obama presidency, which is what happened, then I don't think there would be nearly so much anger at the Democrats as there is. But the fact is that the Democrats have been presiding over the increasing impoverishment of this country, just as the Republicans have. And this has been going on since the early 1970s.
Du hast eben schon Portland erwähnt.
Earlier, you mentioned Portland as being the site where, over the last years, which has become more important also with regard to street credibility. It achieved a lot of attention because here we're dealing with a city where we're dealing with an accumulation of protests and protest movements. Now, when it comes to Portland, what's the mood like in the city ever since the election? What's the mood like in the movements, the grassroots movements amongst those people who took to the streets and are taken to the streets? Would part of them say, we've got the lesser evil, so let's stay quiet now? Is it a mood where you go for new goals, or would people be hesitant and wait for things to unfold?
I think what's been happening in Portland is a complicated phenomenon. There are different reasons why Portland has been really one of the main centers of activity in the United States since last May. And one of the reasons is the history of Oregon as a white homeland and the history of institutional racism in Oregon. That's part of the equation, part of the thing, because in Portland, unlike in many other cities, but in cities like Portland and Minneapolis, especially Portland and Minneapolis, since the 80s, there has been open conflict between the far right and the left. Both Portland and Minneapolis were centers of far right activity since the 1980s. And so because of that, the left, especially the anarchist left, has been very involved with physically combating the right and driving the right out of this city by the 90s. Largely, they left. They went to Idaho and other places. But, I mean, they're still here, but they left in terms of being a well-organized force. That's started to change recently, especially with the rise of Trump. The right is now very active, as well as the left around here. And I think that's part of why there's all this open conflict. But also there's a long history of horrible police brutality in this city and horrible police racism and the incredible amounts of brutality that the police have shown since last May has been a big part of why there's been so much ongoing protest. But then you also have to make a clear separation between what happened when the federal agents, I don't know what to call them, the federal police agents from different agencies that Trump sent here during the summer for several weeks. That was a period when you saw thousands of people coming onto the streets every night, and that was because I think a lot of the people who came onto the streets then were basically supporters of the Democratic Party and opponents of Trump. Whereas what you saw before and after the federal troops were here were generally quite a bit smaller protests, but often still quite large, but usually quite a bit smaller than the ones that were here, that were happening when the federal troops were here. And that is, these protests are more people who are opposed to the two-party racist, institutionally racist capitalist system. But even within the ranks of those protesters, there are divisions between those who only want to focus on racism and those who want to focus on a broader agenda, because race is part of a broader agenda in the view of many people.
Okay. Soweit, David.
That's fine, David. We want to hear your music and want to listen to your music. We already played the trailer of the Rosa Luxemburg conference. Waiting for the Hurricane is your song that we played in the trailer, and you've got 15 minutes or so to share some other songs of yours with us. I'm looking forward to this. I want to thank you very much. I wish you all the best for your fights to be fought in the months and years to come. And I hope that what we wanted to do for such a long time, to meet live in Berlin, that this is going to happen soon, so that you can play and perform in front of a large audience. Until then, I wish you all the best. And I'd like to open the floor for David Rovitz.
Thank you. Just get set up a little here. Yes, I would have loved to be there live, and then I wouldn't have been late on the stage. Oh my, that's very embarrassing. And I would have loved to be playing with Konstantin Wecker, but someday I'll have a gig with Konstantin. So I'll do a song I wrote. I'll start with a song I wrote just a few weeks ago. We had 4,000 people die of COVID on Wednesday in the United States. And while the siege on the Capitol was taking place, 4,000 more people in this country died of COVID. And that's, I think, pretty much every day. We're up to like 4,000 a day. And but the incredibly bizarre aspect of this situation is that so many of the people dying of COVID don't believe that the disease exists. And that seems amazing on the face of it at first. But then when you look at how the government and the media have systematically been lying to the people in so many ways for such a long time, then I think it is no surprise that there are people who just don't know what to believe. I think of the time that Colin Powell, Bush's man, came before the United Nations and lied 31 times in a row about why the U.S. needed to go to war with Iraq. And many of these people are veterans of the military, and they're very upset. This is a song about one of them. They lied about the wars, took time to figure out that democracy and freedom was not what it was about. They said we'd fight the terrorists, but all that I could see was I was occupying someone else's country. They lied about the weapons. They all were so convinced. The generals on the TV, haven't heard from them since. They say it was an accident, but I think it was their plan. They spread the lie on CNN and NPR and C-SPAN. They lied about the jobs all the pundits used to say before the city was abandoned and the good jobs went away. Sign up to this free trade bill, win-win all around. Now half the guys I used to know are 6 feet underground. Lying is all they seem to do. Looking at us on TV, they pretend they care, but it's all about the money, which anyone can tell if you have half a brain. Why I should believe them now, it just seems insane. Talk turned to the virus, what we all stood to lose. I was not the only one who thought it was fake news. I just went about my life like I normally would do. So maybe I'll catch a cold, I thought, or a little flu. They lie about so much, I wish it were not true. But from this hospital bed, if I could just click undo, I guess I would have worn a mask, stayed home to quarantine instead of being intubated. Hooked up to this machine, you can say that I'm an idiot. Maybe, I don't know. But before I take my leave, before I have to go, before they stick me in a box with quarters on my eyes, there's lots of blame to go around here, and I know where it lies. They lied about wars. So that's one song I wrote recently, and you might mute your mic on the other end there, Suzanne or whoever's there. I could mute it for you, but I'm hearing it, so I imagine other people are. I don't know how it works, but maybe nobody else hears it other than me. That's fine. Of course, after all the things I was saying, it is undeniably the case that this country is founded on slavery, white supremacism, racism, and but also many other things. And I'll do a song I wrote just after Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by the police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who were just found not guilty of doing anything wrong. Jacob Blake was walking to his SUV. Alton Sterling was selling DVDs. Eric Garner had just broken up a fight. Breonna Taylor was asleep in the middle of the night. Tamir Rice was playing in the park. Elijah McClain was out walking after dark. Dominique Clayton was sleeping in her bed where she was shot by a cop in the back of her head. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Walter Scott was driving to a store. Betty Jones was answering her door. Philando Castile was driving home with his girlfriend. Anthony Hill was naked on the grass when he met his end. Edsel Ford was walking in his neighborhood. Michael Brown was blown away just standing where he stood. Kendra James was shot to death at a traffic stop by yet another unaccountable killer cop. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Atiana Jefferson was playing a video game with her little nephew. Gunned down just the same. Oscar Grant was celebrating the new year. Handcuffed when the shots rang out that everyone could hear. Eric Reason pulled into a parking spot. Not long after that was when he was shot. George Floyd was just shopping in a store. Micah Xavier Johnson thought he was still at war. Say their names. 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 So here in Portland, there were I don't know how many, 107 straight nights of protests, at least, with hundreds to tens of thousands of participants, usually closer to hundreds. But as I mentioned before, when the federal troops were here, it was thousands every night. And there have been protests in multiple parts of the city every day, and this has been true all over the country. But the police brutality here in Portland has been worse than anywhere in terms of the amount of, I think there are 6,000 documented cases of police brutality over the course of the summer, documented by journalists. And many of those cases of brutality were against journalists and legal observers and medics, just anybody who was in the streets. And so people have been developing different ways of defending themselves against the police on the assumption that the police would not be using live bullets, which so far they have generally not done at protests. They have not fired live ammunition into crowds yet, although the far right did when they came to Portland at the end of August. And the police were completely nowhere to be seen in the city. And this is also very normal, in case anybody thinks, why was there no security at the Capitol? This is because half of the police in this country are members of the far right, just like in most countries. But I don't have exact proof to bear that out, but I would say my estimate is about 50% are white supremacists. But people have been developing different means of defending themselves. And, of course, with social media, there's been a lot of, it's easier to see what's going on in the rest of the world. And the umbrella use in Hong Kong against tear gas was noted. And umbrellas are a very common protest feature here. But along with umbrellas, people, of course, realized that helmets and vests and other things to protect against impact munitions are very helpful. But another thing that people discovered is very useful are leaf blowers. And many of us living in urban environments really hate leaf blowers because they are very noisy and they're very polluting, and they're usually run on gasoline. And there are no emission standards for leaf blowers, so they're just horrible little pollution things, and I just detest them until the protests started, and I found that leaf blowers have all kinds of very practical uses, and both for blowing the tear gas back at the police. And also I discovered during Halloween, leaf blowers make very good socially distanced candy delivery systems. I have a little video on YouTube if you want to see how a leaf blower can deliver candy to children. It's a bit violent, but the children like it. It's been 2 months now since that cop took a knee, like a knee upon the neck of a whole society. Folks rose up all over, starting there in the Midwest. The National Guard came in upon the governor's request. Whenever people took the streets, riot cops attacked, shooting folks in their faces and their backs. Flooding streets with tear gas, see how the people stand, with masks upon their faces and leaf blowers in their hands. There have been drive-by shootings and weaponizing trucks that the death counts what it is so far is partly up to luck and partly up to barricades used to block the way so folks might live to fight another day. That is if they're not killed by agents of the state like the ones who came to Portland to make America great, to face a rainbow nation that says screw your white homeland, with masks upon their faces and leaf blowers in their hands. As they kidnap people off the streets here in the global north, as the tear gas billows, the poison belches forth, as those who would be dictators make their power play, as people from all over town face them down and say, we don't want police, a better world can be built. Perhaps it starts with someone's hand upon the hilt, making tornadoes out of tear gas. Maybe not what Mama planned, with masks upon their faces and leaf blowers in their hands. It's been 2 months now since that cop took a knee. I think that's my allotted time, unless you want to hear more. But I think it says 25 minutes on my screen, so I don't want to go over, even though I started late. But I'm very glad to have been invited to sing at the conference. I wish I could have been there in person. I sang there, I think, 20 years ago in person at the Rosa Luxemburg conference. During one of my first visits to Germany, and it's just a pleasure to join you all, and hope to see you again sometime, maybe 2022 in Germany in physical form.
David Roberts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we really hope we can do that. We really hope we can see you 2022 live in Berlin. That'd be wonderful. Thank you very much, David. And now we proceed to the next highlight of this year's Rosa Luxemburg conference, the last discussion that we're going to have. Amazon as a winner of the crisis is what we're talking about now, because the pandemic doesn't just generate victims, there have been millions of losers, but there are also winners. Jeff Bezos, for example, who has apparently earned $183 billion US. That's his private assets. But we don't want to just talk about him. We want to talk about how to defend ourselves against him, and maybe to have a look at how distribution could be organized in a more effective way if one person doesn't suck up all the profit. I want to welcome Orhan Akman, and there'll be 3 other guests joining us by live link-up. And I'd like to pass the floor now on to Stefan Huth, who's the editor-in-chief of the Junge Welt Daily. You have the floor, Stefan. Thank you, Sebastian. Good evening to everyone, and a very warm welcome from me as well to what is really a very special conference, and to our discussion today, which is looking at an interesting subject. Sebastian already said we're talking about Amazon as a winner of the crisis, a multinational group who have generated amazing profits in recent months. Like almost no other company, Amazon has benefited from the pandemic and has used its position on the market scrupulously. If retail in bricks for non-essential goods have ground to a halt, Amazon's sales have gone up massively. Jeff Bezos, CEO of the company, as we just heard, has private assets totaling some $183 billion US. In the middle of this week, the position as richest person on the planet was passed on